Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host, Paula Taylor, and this is episode 191. Just a quick note, the platform that I was using to edit and mix the podcast changed over the last couple of weeks, and all of a sudden they wanted to charge me a bunch of money to use their service, and I didn't realize they said there was going to be a watermark. I didn't realize it was going to be in the middle throughout periodically until I went back and listened to an episode, and I was like, this is not great. So I have been working to find a new platform that's going to work, that will have good sound. And I know last week, the program for the sound, or for the last full episode, there was a little bit of an issue, especially I think with the intro and the outro music. So just know that I'm working on that. I have really high standards, and I'm also a one-woman show. So sometimes it takes me a little time to adjust when something shifts, to figure out what the best path forward is. And I'm currently working on that. So thank you for being patient with me. So today we're going to talk about why spiritual awakening matters. And this is not the topic I had in mind. I had another topic. I even actually had some notes. That topic will be coming up at some point. But my guides got very clear and very, not stern, that's not quite the right word, insistent with me that I talk about this. And it was kind of funny because I was like, well, anyone who's listening to the show probably has a sense of why this is so important. Like, this is basically a show about spiritual awakening. Why do I need to talk about why this matters? And there's a couple of reasons they wanted me to talk about this. So a lot of this is going to be fairly channeled, and sometimes my speech gets a little weird, especially if I'm actively channeling. So again, thank you for your patience, as I usually have some idea of what I'm going to talk about, or I have kind of a vague outline in my head, and then sometimes I get on a channeling path and we go sort of a different direction. But this time I have very little idea of exactly what I'm going to say, other than I knew they wanted me to do this topic and they said it was important. So within the last couple of weeks, I started getting this call to go back and listen to some older episodes of the podcast. And I do that. I've been doing that since the podcast started. A lot of times I'm so in the flow as I'm speaking that I'm not necessarily absorbing exactly what I'm saying. And so I will go back and receive the podcast, and I'll go back to the older episodes that have meditations and activations. I'll go into the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary, which is the online community where the newer activations are. I will go and repeat those and allow myself to receive them, because as I'm channeling them, I'm sort of receiving them, but I'm also channeling. And I got this really strong call to go back to near the beginning of the year. And I'm like, well, that's vague. Like, where do I start? Do I have to listen to the whole year again? Like, what, give me some, give me some clearer direction here. Cause I'm a person of limited time resources. And, I wanted to kind of be where they wanted me to be. And they said, well, you'll know it when you see it. So I went into the list and I was scrolling back to the beginning of the year, and the bonus episode that I posted February 1st caught my eye. It's bonus episode. I believe it says New Moon / 5D timeline card pull. Very interesting. I am filming this in July, the day after the new moon in 2025. Now, they're telling me specifically that it doesn't matter when in space time you listen to this, all of this is relevant, because we do exist in kind of a cyclical nature. But there's something special about this year that they wanted me to talk about, and it leads into this idea of why spiritual awakening is so important. So I went back and I started listening to this bonus episode, and I was pulling cards for my Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. This was a bonus episode. I didn't intend it to be public when I was filming it. And I was like, we're going to do a new moon card pull. And as I'm pulling the cards, I started realizing this was more than just for the new moon in February. It was kind of an overall 2025 spiritual awakening, like what's coming in the future. And it was very interesting because as I went back to listen to it, I was like, wow, this is really relevant right now in July. And I started getting more channeled information about why it was relevant. And this is kind of where they want me to start with this. So essentially, we have been in kind of a time loop or a time spiral since February of this year. And the information that came to me was that they gave me this image of sort of one of those old TV shows. Like, for some reason, I always go to the Brady Bunch, but I feel like this happens in all sitcoms and sometimes on cartoons, where someone is trying to wake someone up and they'll sort of say, hey, Bugs Bunny, wake up. and Bugs Bunny's still sleeping, and they'll say, "Hey, Bugs Bunny, wake up." And he's still sleeping. And then they'll kind of shake him, "Bugs Bunny, wake up." And he's still sleeping. And then they'll go and get a bucket of water and dump a bucket of water on the head of the sleeping person to get them to wake up. That is essentially what the energy of 2025 has been. So we started back in February at this. I kept using the term tipping point. We're at this tipping point. And I said, if enough people can awaken, we can fully shift into this new system, building new systems of the 5D, of 5D consciousness, which is inclusivity and yes, and it is unconditional love. It is this space as opposed to the 3D, which is black or white, all or nothing, yes or no. It's us versus them. And we've been in that space for a really long time. Humanity has. And as I was making that show, I was like remembering kind of being in that space. I'm feeling almost like a little bit desperate about this. Like, if we can just get enough people to wake up. There's this term, I think it's called the 100th monkey effect. And it's based on these, I think it was Japan. They were observing these monkeys learning a new behavior. And once enough monkeys learned it, then very quickly it sort of cascaded through the rest of the colony of monkeys. So it was like, the idea was like, you just need 100 monkeys to kind of be in this space, and then all the rest of the monkeys will follow suit. And that's kind of the feeling I had in February. And so as I was listening to this, with the hindsight of being now in July, the information that was coming through was like, we've been in a time loop since then, and we've been kind of repeating, and they've been increasingly sending this more and more and more intense energy in order to wake people up. So we kind of started with the like, "Hey, Bugs Bunny, wake up." And then it was like, "Hey, Bugs Bunny, wake up." And then it was the shaking, and then it was the cold water over the head, which has been the last 2 months, especially 6 weeks, 2 months, last like 2 moon cycles. And this new moon cycle that we just started yesterday in July, every new moon cycle is kind of a little bit of a chance to start over, to set your intentions. But this is another arrival point. They were using this term, and we'll go into that a little bit more. We've sort of come full circle in this like spiraling, looping path to where we were in February, where if enough people can just wake up, we're like past the tipping point, I think. And I hope, I don't know this for sure, and everyone has free will, so people can wake up and then go back to sleep. I see that a lot. So what I'm getting right now is that enough people have woken up that we really have kind of reached that critical mass to move forward collectively. Now, we have personal timelines, we have a collective timeline, and you may not resonate with this idea of kind of being stuck in a loop. And that's why I also use the term spiral. And there's a lot of nuance in here that I don't really want to go into, because I want to keep this concise so we can move on to kind of the next part of this. But essentially, even if it looks like you're looping back around, if you're doing spiritual awakening work, you're in a spiral where your slinky, your spiral, your spring is kind of stretching out. So we're doing the work of stretching out. We're also doing the work of like moving through the spring kind of into a space that is more of this 5D consciousness, that is more connected to source energy, however you want to think about that. And so if you felt like you've been caught in a loop, sometimes that's because the spring is sort of really stuck together. It's not extended. If you now are looking back from this arrival point and were thinking you were in a loop, but when you look back, you realize you've really made a lot of growth in that time, that's because your spring has been kind of stretching out. And so as you've been looping, you've been essentially expanding further into your awakening process. So while I was thinking about this right before I came on, I was like, I don't know what to say about this. And I feel like I've said all this before. And why am I doing this? They wanted me to really talk about this idea of arrival points. So all along our spiritual journey, we have these arrival points. And again, we have personal arrival points, and then we have collective arrival points. Sometimes they line up. A lot of that is happening right now. So we had a big arrival point in February where there was an option to really expand for people. And some people really took advantage of that, and some people did not. And that's always going to be the case. We have free will. Awakening is a choice. And it's a little bit like being in a marriage, where sometimes they say, you don't just get married once. Like, you wake up every morning and decide to stay married, decide to stay committed to your partner. That's what spiritual awakening is like. It's essentially a marriage with source energy, with this awakening process. And just like a marriage, sometimes things are going well, some things are not going so well. Sometimes you have a little bit of a divorce process where you move away from spiritual practices that served you for a while and maybe don't feel like they're serving you anymore. You have to move into a new relationship with spirit in a different way. It's a very complicated process, but it is a process of commitment. It's a process of continual commitment. So what happens sometimes is that, like, people kind of wake up and then they go back to sleep. I call this ostriching. So think about an ostrich burying their head in the sand. People will come up, and then those of us who are on the path will be like, hey, come on over. The water's great. And then sometimes they'll walk toward us. Sometimes they'll come all the way. Sometimes they'll make it part of the way or stay where they are. And then their head goes back in the sand. And we all do this. Like, we all have moments of, I'm committed to this so much that it is my profession. So in some ways, it's almost like I don't have a choice, because if I want to be a good professional who helps other people on the spiritual awakening path, I have to constantly be on that path myself. I have to practice what I preach. Otherwise, there's no depth to the work I do. There's no real shift for me or the people that I work with. And ultimately, I will tell you, I'm thinking of my sound healing mentor who said something like this when I was in the symposium in Cambodia. This is a selfish practice for me. If I didn't have any of the things that I had, if I didn't have a business around this, if I didn't have a podcast, I would still be doing this work. It's kind of a selfish pursuit. And doing this work in the public way that I do it and in the professional way that I do it also keeps me accountable to keep doing this work. And sometimes it's hard. This year has been particularly challenging. No matter how awakened you are, when the universe is dumping a cold water bucket of energy on your head, you are going to be challenged. And that is as it is supposed to be. You can think of it like we're all in kind of this big combined classroom, and there's all sorts of different, it's like a one-room schoolhouse. You've got kindergartners through like PhD dissertation students in this classroom, and there's no judgment around any of that. It's just where we're at. But when that bucket of cold water gets dumped on everybody, it gets dumped on the PhD dissertation students just as much as the kindergartners. Now, the PhD dissertation students might handle it better because they have a lot more tools and they've been doing it for a lot longer. That's kind of how this awakening process goes, but it doesn't mean that it's not challenging, that it's not difficult. And so my guides really wanted people to understand, first of all, that sometimes we need an arrival point. I sometimes call this integration, but this is bigger than integration, because we're doing integration all the time now. And this is partly why this is coming through. So we're increasingly being asked to do activation and release and integration all at the same time. And it used to be that the new moon to the full moon was the activation. You set your intention at the new moon. I'm activating a release of scarcity beliefs or whatever it is. I'm activating stepping into more abundance. And that activation energy comes in and peaks at the full moon. This is how it used to be. And then the release work starts. Because in order to activate, remember my analogy of getting new clothes for your closet. In order to put the new clothes in your closet, you have to get rid of the old clothes that are no longer serving you. So the full moon to the new moon used to be the release cycle, where we were releasing the stuff that didn't serve us so that activation energy had space to integrate into our closet. And during that time, there was integration in both of those spaces. We would get activation energy, we'd get some calm days of integration. We'd get release energy, we'd get calm days of integration. That is no longer the case. We are getting activation, release, and integration energy all at the same time. And sometimes it's a choice of like, I'm choosing activation, I'm choosing release, I'm choosing integration. But the 5D consciousness evolution of this is that I'm doing these things at the same time. And the reason that arrival points are so important is that it used to be the integration period was a little bit of your arrival point, where you could look back and go like, oh yeah, that was hard, and then I did this, and then I released this, and now I have this. And arrival points are so important because they help us see how far we've come. And if we don't take the time to see how far we've come, it's really hard to stay motivated to keep going. So we had a big arrival point in February, and we are at a big arrival point now. And the new moon is kind of an arrival point every month, but because of this Bugs Bunny waking you up, bucket of cold water to the head kind of dynamic that's been going on, we really haven't had any calm arrival points. It's just been almost constant, especially in the last couple of months. Like the last 3 moon cycles have just been insanely intense. And so they wanted me to start talking about this, first of all, to understand that you need these arrival points to look back at where you've come. When I look back at the beginning of this year, I am a completely different person than I was at the beginning of this year. I've been doing personal spiritual awakening trauma. It started with trauma healing. That's how it usually starts, leads into like what I call now spiritual integration healing. And then that leads into spiritual awakening. And then we're kind of doing all of them at the same time eventually, but the end result is that we're more focused on the spiritual awakening part of the journey. I've been doing this for myself for almost 30 years, been doing this professionally for over 20 years. And we have hit a point of exponential growth. And you can go back and listen. I have no idea what episode of the podcast, is probably multiple, where I started talking in August of 2023. Around then, I started talking about how we were going to have this huge shift in the middle of 2024. And it was going to be the power of 40 full moons, is what I was saying. That is the point where we reached the curve of this exponential growth. So if you remember, you're like learning back in math, I don't know, however long ago, when you have an exponential curve, it sort of looks like it's flat at first, and then there's a pretty sharp turn, and then you're going almost straight up, not quite, but like almost straight up. So this like last from mid 2023 to February of this year, they're giving me exact dates now, we were headed into the curve. And 2025 is the beginning of the exponential growth. And keep in mind that, again, this is a choice and this is a commitment. So not everybody is growing exponentially, and that's okay. People who aren't on the path, who aren't ready to awaken, are not necessarily feeling this exponential growth, but they still have access to it. And that is why spiritual awakening matters. That is why this is so important. Because in order to move this critical mass, in order to collectively move our timeline as humanity into a more loving and inclusive timeline, enough of us need to do this spiritual awakening work that we're moving the density of the collective somewhat. It's never our responsibility to do work for other people, and we are connected to a collective. We have ancestral energy, we have what I call energetic lineage, so past lives, parallel lives, future lives. We have the non-human origins. There is karma through that as well. Angelic origins, starseed origins, elemental origins. And all of that is part of the collective energy. So as you clear your personal energy, it begins to clear some of that collective energy. That is not the same thing as trying to clear energy for another person. That doesn't work. Even in my work, that is not what I am here for. I am here to hold space to support people and help them learn how to clear energy for themselves, to help them make use of activation energy, to help them let go of the old wardrobe so the new wardrobe can come in. But I can't do that job for people. It is always their choice and their commitment. So as we do this work for ourselves and we start doing this in community, because when we are in community, there's a reason that we're resonating in a similar frequency. That's what attracts us to community. So as we do this work in community, even if we're focused on the individual, the collective energy that we share, the common quantum origins, the common past or parallel future life origins, possibly even past DNA lineages, because if you go back far enough, we kind of all came from like one DNA, right? That sort of just kept replicating and spreading out. When we do individual work, and especially when that's reflected in a community, and a small community is the way this starts, we have the power to shift even more. That exponential curve grows even more exponentially when we do this together, when we support each other in this work, when we are transparent and authentic and vulnerable about doing this work and about the fact that it is work. This is not an easy journey. And it doesn't have to be done. It can be done with more ease. That's part of the 5D too, is stepping out of struggle and into ease. And we have been in a pattern of struggle for so long, societally, individually. It's a little bit ridiculous. And it's really hard to step out of. That's something that I've really been working on this year, is stepping into more ease. And with that, more abundance. And there's so much programming that's really, really deeply rooted about how we have to struggle in order to survive. We have to earn our productivity through working very hard. It's all of those things. We cannot shift that collectively until we dismantle it internally, individually, and within these small groups, like this grassroots kind of community growth. And the reason that spiritual awakening matters is because we are in that one room classroom, the one room schoolhouse. That's what I was trying to say. So we're all in this soup together. And there are people who haven't even really started school. They're not even in preschool yet. And then there are people who are experts who are teaching other people, and then everything in between. And in order for the collective to shift, people have to understand how important this work is. If we want to shift humanity, the path there is through spiritual awakening. Full stop. That I will die on that hill. That is the only way we get there. And it's time for people to start understanding that. If you're listening to me, you probably have an understanding of that. It's also time to start talking about it, and not in an evangelized way, not in a like, I can't come out of the gate. The only way we're going to change is through spiritual awakening. You've got to do it. People will do it when they're ready to do it, but they're interested in it now. These buckets of cold water are waking people up. And a lot of times when you first wake up, think about like when you've been in a really deep sleep and you wake up and you like don't know where you are. You're like, what day is it? Who am I? How old am I? What house am I in? Like I've had, I feel like everyone's had that experience where you're like, you wake up as an adult and first you thought you were going to be in your childhood home, or like I have a lot of dreams about like college age. Like I wake up and I'm like, oh wait, what is this? I'm not in a dorm room. Like, where am I? That is the experience of the beginning of spiritual awakening. It's very disorienting. And so those people in the one room schoolhouse that are just starting to step into preschool, they're just starting to learn how to read in kindergarten or first grade. They can't do that on their own. They need help. They have to do the work. I can't force someone to learn to read, but I can give them a book and go through it with them and say, this is what the letter A looks like, and this is what the letter B, and this is the sound of B, just the way that we learned to read. So right now, we are at this tipping point where the cosmic water bucket just got dumped again really intensely for like 2 months straight. And it is waking people up. And people are still scared and they're still lost, and they need support around this. Now, those of us who've been doing this work for a long time, this is the point where this idea of an arrival point is really important. I talked on the last episode about how I had sort of seen someone that I hadn't seen in a while, and kind of realized that like our resonances were really different. And everybody's always changing a little bit. We sort of, hopefully we're always seeking more clarity, expansion, and harmony. And sometimes we have moments of contraction, and we have moments of muddiness, and we have moments of feeling like we're not in harmony with ourselves and the world around us. And especially if it's within us, it's reflected around us. So that was an arrival point for me personally, where I looked back and I was like, oh, wow, I have changed so much since the beginning of this year, or the end of last year, when I kind of last saw this person, that there's a lot of things we don't agree on. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm necessarily like dumping this person from my life, or that I still don't have resonances or things, ways in which we can grow together. It's that sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And sometimes we do have to just completely recognize that a situation is not serving us and move out of it. And there's that 5D word. The more in the 5D consciousness we are, the more we have to start understanding that it's not that simple most of the time. It's not an either or, a yes or no, a black or white, an all or nothing. It's a nuanced thing. It's like, oh, so here's some places where I don't resonate with this person anymore. And here's some places where I do. And I can choose to focus on the places where I do, because that will continue to serve my clarity, expansion, and harmony until it feels like it's not. And this is partly why being in 5D consciousness is so tiring. And I'm just realizing this now too. I've been sleeping more this year than I've ever slept. like laying down, taking naps, sleeping in, like just way more resting physically than I've ever done. And that is because this 5D consciousness is really tiring. Living with so much complexity and so much nuance and so much gray area, like it affects the actual bandwidth of your brain. And if you're neurodiverse like me, neurospicy, which if again you're listening or watching this, there's probably a resonance there in some way, we have a limited bandwidth in our brains. Everybody does, but for neurodivergent people, sometimes it's a little more, I would say, focused. It's intense and focused. And so when I hit my bandwidth overwhelm, I just shut down sometimes to the point where, like, I will have to say to someone, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not following the conversation right now because my brain is just overloaded. And even that is like a 5D space of like claiming, asking for what I need, explaining where I'm at, and being vulnerable in hoping that the person is going to trust and believe me and hold some space for that. So much of this process is about grace, having grace for ourselves and having grace for each other. We are stumbling. I mean, somebody just dumped a bucket of cold water out of our over our heads, and even if we were sort of partially awake, there's always like more awakening to be had. So we're like up out of bed, stumbling around, slipping on the floor. We are not going to do this. This is not a stuck landing. I'm always going to go back to gymnastics when I need a sports reference. When you are learning to do a new beam dismount, for example, that was my favorite apparatus. You start with a big old thick mat because you are going to land on your head, you are going to land on your butt, you are going to land on your face, you're going to land on your knees, you're going to land on your back, you're going to land everywhere before you start landing on your feet. And when you start reliably landing on your feet, then you can put a thinner mat, but it's still a thick mat because you're still learning, and you're still going to kind of fall flat on your face. And then eventually you get to the point where you have a mat that's just supportive enough that you have like the ability to land and stick the landing, and just soft enough that if you do happen to kind of fall over a little bit, you don't break all your limbs. This is the process of stepping out of the 3D into the 5D. We are learning a new beam dismount, and we are like all gangly prepubescent limbs. Like we are halfway to the end of the beam falling off. This is not necessarily a graceful process. And so allowing grace for ourselves and others holds the space for us. You don't yell at, I just interrupted myself. I get all excited and then I interrupt my sentences, and then I go back and listen later and I'm like, oh, I should have finished that sentence. But I'm already on to the next one. So when you are watching a little kid learn to walk, I've used this analogy before, you don't shame them, you don't yell at them, you don't push them over when they like don't succeed in taking a step. You celebrate everything. You hold their hands, you give them support. That is the kind of support we need to be giving each other. And this is another reason that spiritual awakening matters, because spirituality, and another word for spiritual is energetic or quantum. You can use either one of those, they are interchangeable. We are talking about the energy that imbues all things, which at the base of it is source energy or unconditional love. And in this 3D reality, which we are still in, there's all sorts of differentiations of that include things like fear and hatred and shame and grief and the things that feel really uncomfortable. As we are transitioning out of this 3D, which is fear or love, into the 5D, the beginning of that is fear and love. Like, how do I hold both of these at the same time? And I'm very overwhelmed and I don't understand. And we are like children learning to walk. And some of us are further along on the path than others, right? Just like an adult might help you learn to walk as a baby. We need to hold a space of grace for ourselves and for each other. And there's still accountability there. This does not mean that we allow for things like abuse, that we allow for people to hurt other people. There is nuance to a point. And that's the other thing that's exhausting too. Like, where is the line? You know, there is a line somewhere that we don't want to cross or that we choose not to cross, but it's sometimes moving even within the same like conversation. It's like tracking a moving target. So, because underneath everything physical is energy, is spirituality, energy, or quantum matter, whatever way you want to think about this, the only way to truly shift the physical is by addressing the energetic, the quantum, the spiritual. This is why I went into this work. I could not have articulated it that well at the time, but I just felt like there was something more. There was something more. There was something more. That's how this journey begins a lot of times. There's got to be something more to this. There's got to be something more to life than going to work and coming home and buying a car and paying my bills. There's got to be something more. There is. It's your quantum nature. It's your spiritual essence. That is what you're really here for. And the physical is actually meant to serve that. And we have set up the physical to shut that down. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's control and there's programming, and there's just like that we forgot. It's not always as dark and ominous as people like to think. Like, absolutely, there are people using darker, denser energies in order to try to control other people and keep other people down and keep the workers working so the rich people can keep getting money. Like, all of that is real. And a lot of times we've just forgotten who we are. We've forgotten that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are not human beings, meat sacks that happen to have a spiritual essence. We are spiritual beings having an experience of being in 3D reality. And until enough of us recognize that, nothing is going to change. We cannot treat the earth better and make sure that we have an earth to inherit, to give, to pass down, until we address the spirituality of all things. When you look at indigenous cultures, spirituality was baked into every part of their culture because they understood it was the foundation. And we have lost that understanding. So the reason that spiritual awakening matters is because it is the foundation of everything all the potential that we have to shift into. And it is also the reason why people are so unhappy and why there is so much mental illness and so much loneliness and so much grief and so much sadness and so much anger and so much us versus them, is because people have forgotten that at a spiritual level, we are all one. Whew. There is no separation on the quantum, in the energetic. We are all made of the same energy. And when we remember that, it makes it so much harder to do harm to others. We make mistakes. Again, we're gangly people, gangling down the end of the beam and falling and hitting our face and hitting the ground. Like, we will ungracefully hurt people accidentally oftentimes. And I just got like 4 pieces of information at once. I knew that was going to happen at least once. And the underlying essence of everything that we are is quantum energy, is unconditional love. And when we can step into that, because that is what the 5D is, it is a visceral understanding. It's not just knowing this in your head, it's feeling this in your body. It's reflecting this out in the way that you live, in the choices that you make. And it's not unconditional kindness either, because people mistake that as well. When you are in an unconditional loving state, you are standing up for yourself. You are setting boundaries. You are taking care of yourself because you are precious, because you are made of that same energy that everyone else is made of. So no one else comes before you. You come first. And when you take care of yourself and you fill your cup and you work with your spiritual essence, then you have the ability to begin to hold space for other people to do that within the clear boundaries that still exist in the 3D. This is why this is such a difficult shift, because we are truly stepping into the yes and. Yes, we are in a physical reality, and sometimes we need to say no to things. And sometimes that is the unconditionally loving thing to do in this physical reality. So spiritual awakening matters because it is the foundation of human growth. It is the reason, the abandonment of our spirituality as the center of our lives. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about spirituality, specifically energy, quantum matter, unconditional love, whatever word you want to use for it, ki, chi, prana. That needs to be the center of our lives, personally and collectively. And until that is the case, we will struggle. We will flounder. We will be unable to find fulfillment in our personal lives, in our collective societies, in our communities, because the spiritual essence has to be the center, because it is the foundation. It is what we are built around. So we cannot focus on the physical solely. We cannot solve problems in the physical solely either. There has to be a spiritual focus, an energetic focus, a true visceral understanding that we are all one, that we are all one energy differentiated into many parts, experiencing this physical reality, which can be so beautiful and so amazing. Being in nature is so fulfilling. There's a spirituality there. It's one of the only places that I think people still understand that is where you can find some spirituality. And we can expand that. We can build communities around the fact that the spiritual is the essence of who we are, and it's the essence of the community. And until enough people awaken and are willing to do that, to step into that process, we will not be able to get there. We will not be able to solve climate change. We will not be able to get rid of war. We will not be able to move into using technology that serves us instead of using it to distract us. Oh, that was a whole channeling thing right there. So this is why spiritual awakening matters. This is why, if you are one of those people in the classroom, wherever you are, there is somebody you can hold space for. You can hold space. If you're in third grade, you can help the kindergartners learn how to spell A, learn how to write their letters. You can also hold space for the fifth graders who are trying to help you, and you can accept their help, because that's another issue here, is that part of stepping out of the 3D and into the 5D is learning how to receive. Many of us have been taught to give and give and give. That's part of this, work, 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 struggle, 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 struggle. There is no space when you are in, that is an active space of giving, whether you're giving to a job or giving to your family or giving to your friends. There's no space for receiving when you're in an active space of giving. So part of this, and one of the future shows I have in mind, is talking about the rise of the divine feminine. That is the receptivity. We have to relearn how to receive, or learn for the first time in this lifetime. Most of us haven't ever really learned that. We have to learn that there are going to be receptive times and allow ourselves to receive and not always be the one giving. And this is not always giving out of love. Sometimes we're giving out of condescension, is the word that's coming through. Everyone's had we use the term mansplaining, but there's definitely all gender fluidity spectrum people tend to over explain things sometimes, or sort of condescend to you. So when you are condescending to someone, you are still giving. You are giving a vibration that's kind of contracted and muddy and not harmonious. And you're also not in a space to receive. If you are one of those people who knows everything and has nothing left to learn, you're not going to be able to receive. And the third grader receives as much from the kindergartner as they do from the fifth grader. There is no hierarchy in the 5D. There is a circular process, and there is understanding that some people are just beginning and some people are further along, but nobody knows it all. We're not meant to. We never will as humans. There is not a human alive that knows everything, especially in a spiritual way and in a brain way too. It's just not possible. And that's a projection. That's just an example that I use, but I just wanted it to be understood that the giving it, when we use the word giving, sometimes we think of like giving help or giving assistance or giving care. And there's lots of different ways of giving. There's giving condescension, like I just said. There's giving constant energy through like just constantly talking at someone, or kind of throwing energetic darts. There's lots of different ways to give. that are not altruistic. And truly, even giving care and nurturing, if it's not done from a full cup, then that's not altruistic either. So there's a shift. One of the arrival points here is this shift inward. We've been called, I've said it in a few TikToks recently, that 2025 feels a lot like 2020 to me. There's a lot of like a COVID-y feeling, is what I call it. And it's confusing because when we were kind of in hermit mode or stuck at home or kind of in these insular communities during COVID, it was like, oh, I understand because COVID. And now it's sort of like, it's the energy. It's driving us back in to focus on ourselves for introspection, to focus on our small circles so that we can hold space for each other. Because as these big systems crumble, and they already are, these 3D systems, we will need these small communities of support, these grassroots communities. And it's going to be a very ungraceful process. So the more grace that we can invite in knowingly, intentionally, the more we allow space for the gangliness, the unwieldiness of us trying to figure this out as we go, because that's pretty much what we're doing. So if you are enjoying the show, and if you want to step further into spiritual awakening, I would love for you to join us in our Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. This is our online community that's $11 a month. You get access to communication with like-hearted individuals, and sometimes that is even challenging in a small community. That's how we're growing this 5D. So you get interaction. That's why I don't say like-minded individuals, like-hearted individuals. We don't always agree on things, but we agree to hold a space of grace and love for each other. That's what a 5D community looks like. You also get some exclusive discounts and access to all of the guided meditations and powerful activations that accompany the full episodes, as well as the bonus episodes are only available to the Spiritual Awakening Sanctuary. So we would love to have you join us there if that calls to you. And there's information in the podcast notes. You can also go to paulataylorenergy.com. Thank you so much for holding grace for yourself and the rest of us as we bumble through this puberty of 3D to 5D together. We have reached a tipping point. We're right on the edge, beginning that sort of exponential ascent, or you can think of it as a descent with ease. And all we have to do is stay present and continue focusing on the fact that we are spiritual beings, we are energetic beings, we are quantum beings. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening. I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.